questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. I'll open it up to the floor now. If you have any questions for this or
can try. I mean, I can try.
You can ask. I don't know if I have the answer.
Do we need to use the microphone for the camera?
if you don't mind.
Yeah, we'll just keep passing it between us.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about what research findings are available about across the different tree species and all year round availability, presuming that the different subspecies or the Ecology species are fruiting at different times. You would expect that there's year-round food supply, that they're not all going to fruit at the same time and then for part of the year the birds have nothing. Is there research on how the year-round food supply?
I'm not aware of it. That doesn't mean it's not there though, whether somebody's mapped it out. I mean, we also know that, not every casuarina fruits every year as well. So there's different triggers to why a feed tree being used by glossies might fruit one year but doesn't fruit. I think we're building the story there, but I don't know there's been much work on that, Danny. Danny's really much more on top of researchy stuff than I am, but I don't think we've pulled that picture together yet, no.
They move around seasonally for sure, and I suspect that it's got something to do with that. But I don't think we really know.
Yeah, Martin, you're a bit of a botanist. Have you put any understanding there with the different casuarina species about seasonal patterns and?
I don't see any with them, but like with rainforest trees, you can go down different roads and they're doing different things. It sort of works out beautiful for animals because it spreads it all out. It might be happening with casuarinas, yellow casuarinas, but not that I've noticed.
Well, the reason I was asking was our 5-year study is actually looking at 3 species, and I just wanted to know how can we draw on existing research, or will we be the first citizen science project to actually demonstrate that?
I would near guarantee you'd be the first citizen science project looking into that, but whether there has been any research into that. I mean, it makes sense that glossies feed on, 2 or 3 species within a region. They would need to have year-round food supply, so they are choosing where they feed and which species they feed on to ensure that they do have year-round food supply. So it makes sense, but exactly which species in which locations at what times of year, I'm not sure we've mapped that.
Because that will be of interest to us with the significant dieback in one of the species that we're currently seeing from drought. Whether the other species are able to compensate, or do they move from 2 species to the 3rd one that we are looking at, which they don't feed on so much? Will they do compensatory feeding?
Yeah. So at the moment, I guess the Conservancy's got anecdotal evidence coming in, and it's really difficult with anecdotal evidence because you're not sure whether we're getting increased sightings. Is it because there actually are more birds visiting an area they've not previously been in, or is it because somebody's going and everybody's told people that birds are at Toohey Forest, so you're getting lots of sightings of birds at Toohey Forest where we didn't have them before? But there certainly has been coming through to the Conservancy people telling us stories that they usually have, a family of birds. The number of birds that they've been seeing in that local area has increased. So that's people doing that long-term citizen science monitoring on their own properties. They're seeing birds coming into their area now that they don't normally see. So that suggests that there has been that cumulative impact of drought plus fire is impacting. Generally speaking, we're seeming to getting more sightings popping up in the coastal areas. So there's a thought that maybe the birds in the western spaces are moving more coastal at the moment because they just don't have those trees through those national parks and main range to feed on at the moment.
No doubt that's happening.
Corellas.
Sorry?
Corellas in the Lockyer Valley now.
Oh, corellas. There are thousands of them.
And budgies.
And the
Budgies are coming.
budgies, absolutely. There's western birds that have really moved in. The tricky thing also with glossy recovery, we've talked about the fact that they have a very slow reproductive rate. I mean, also the fact that whilst we do know that they'll feed on a 5-year-old she oak if it produces seed, there's obviously not much on it. So we've got to wait 5-10 years for a tree to produce enough seed if it's one the glossies choose to feed on. And you've got to wait 100 years, 200 years for a nest hollow to be replaced these birds are waiting a long time before they can actually even be the ones that are surviving in the physical space to be able to reproduce. So it's when you stop and think about it, you feel like curling up into a ball and go, oh my God, what is the state of glossies? Because they were already, low numbers. They were already under threat. We've just had a massive impact in this region and New South Wales particularly. And the recovery is not simple. We can't go out and just put food out there for them. That doesn't work. We don't know in southeast Queensland and northern New South Wales of any records of glossies using artificial nest hollows. We know they do on KI, but there's probably there's probably more limited hollows on KI. They've got a really restricted geographic location. How many of the hollow trees out in the national parks and the areas that were burnt have been lost that might have been glossy nest hollows? So we have the Conservancy's put in a couple of funding applications recently to try and put nest boxes out into those landscapes if we get the funding to go and put them out there, and Danny will be involved in monitoring them. So we think this is a chance to actually understand whether they will use it, because they're almost going to be forced to use them because maybe there's nothing else left. But at the moment, as Danny said, the comparison between SEQ and Kangaroo Island, you can find all your nesting birds on Kangaroo Island. Here you just go, well, they're out there somewhere. But
and they're definitely strongly seasonal here. Well, I say that as an anecdote, but I know for sure, it's pretty much like every 2 years in certain places that I know of, you'll find them and they'll be nesting there, but it's only every 2 years, it's not every year. Whereas on Kangaroo Island, it's every year. So, and I think that's a food thing, but we just don't know enough.
Climate too. If you look at that Mediterranean climate, with whatever type of nest box you're using, may not work here with the worst, more heat and whatever. You might have to use something that's more insulated.
We've got a few different designs now.
Yeah, so the designs, the Conservancy's tried the old wooden box sort of setup that a couple of manufacturers make around here, which aren't the ones used on Kangaroo Island, but they were designed for large cockatoos. We haven't had any success. That's the Conservancy specifically trying in a couple of locations where we went, well, we know hollows are really limited here on the Bay Islands. We know that the birds have nested here. They seem to be looking for hollows. If we put a nest box up here, rather than just randomly in the landscape, maybe we can really test out whether glossies will use a nest box. We haven't had success there yet. We've recently got a donation of the cockatoos that the carnabies use, which are they the ones used? It's very similar to the ones used on Kangaroo Island. We want to put them out in the landscape because we know that's a design that the birds on KI use. So there's probably nothing wrong with the design. Whether our glossies prefer them to a tree hollow, who knows?
You'd think there'd be a totally different temperature.
Yes.
From a thick walled tree hollow.
Yes.
Like that, and then a thin little PVC. But they're doing it with frogs, and the frogs are cooking in them. So maybe they are all right.
Yeah.
On KI, they use at least 3 different designs, so wooden ones, thin PVC, and then the thick PVC. And they've done a lot of tests of the temperature, and they seem to be using them all. In Victoria, I said how we've just finished the breeding season there with the audio moths. One of the questions that the recovery team had of me for that, I don't know if you remember, around Christmas time, there was those really severe heat waves in Victoria where it got to high 40s, and everybody was concerned because the red-tails are in cockatoos there, and they were really concerned about the temperature. No nest failed on that day, which is really good. I was getting ready. Yeah. Well, they're double walled, so they have been designed through a lot of research with the carnabies. So they're not just like a pipe that's been cut. So, and they do think about placement. They try and keep it away from, But it's definitely not going to be as insulated as a natural hollow or as a wooden hollow.
I've got native bees in cypress pine boxes which are that thick, the sides. For that reason, with a little air cooling thing on the top. And then you place them in the right place as well. Otherwise they melt.
I mean, the ideal is to have enough nesting hollows and enough food resources. The glossies can just do their thing and cover their populations. But we're beginning to think they might need a helping hand, particularly with what's happened with the fires. And if we can trial these and they work, then it does give the Conservancy some opportunities moving forward to go, okay, if we can work out where to put these, we've proven that they've used them, it's the right design, maybe if we install them in a few other locations in the landscape, we're actually going to build the population long term and it not be limited by nesting hollows. And it also means in those urban areas where we are losing hollow trees, not that we want to lose hollow trees, that's really the foundational thing, is keep them wherever we can, but maybe there's an opportunity in some more urban environments to put them up and have glossies secured in those locations rather than pushed back out to these sort of more, rural areas.
Yep.
Did I see some years back Gold Coast City Council were trialling making hollows on live trees?
Carving them. Yeah.
Carving them, yeah. UQ did it as well.
And does it work?
I don't know, but it certainly worked as a hollow. Everything went in.
They have worked for some species. I've never heard of it working for big cockatoos, though. Definitely the small parrots and stuff use them. But
It's just going to be such a big hollow.
2 metres deep, isn't it?
yeah, some of them are shallower, but yeah, they generally like pretty big ones because you got to get 2 birds in there. It's pretty not good stuff.
Well, they lost 2 beautiful, in excess of 500-year-old trees up on the downs there at that were known barn owl breeding spots. They were near each other, and they were basically had reports saying don't touch these.
Yeah.
And they came along and said, oh, these need to go.
Yeah.
So they had 18 baby owls.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's terrible.
They were taken to Trish Lahong, who was spending $250 a week feeding them. And I spoke to Toowoomba saying, well, you've got to cause this. You probably need to, can't you help her? It's not our job.
Yeah, it's really hard.
People using like fungal infections to inoculate trees to try and promote hollow growth as well, which could be used just to try and fast track the hollow development process because we have lost so much old growth forest and we, most of what you see around is like 50-year-old, 60-year-old regrowth. It's not old enough to have hollows. So they're using like fungal inoculations to try and promote hollow development, to try and fast track.
Well, it doesn't take much once it starts to go.
Because
the termites are in and parrots are in there digging away at it.
A big hollow for glossies. And then the other thing we maybe just sort of touched on a bit there is that they also face that competition.
That's what I was about to say.
They're not the most aggressive species. We've got sulphur cresteds, corellas.
Corellas are a real problem.
Not so much the two black cockatoos, but corellas and sulphur crested.
And galahs, yeah.
They've got everything against them.
Well, at least they nest in different seasons mostly, which is a good thing. But still,
I'd like to see some flowering fruiting records of the 4 glossy black trees in and around Mount Whitestone that we've got. Because they can go very short distance and you've got all 4 of them.
Yeah.
But I've never really, if I've got photos of flowers, I can see the date. We did it the other day.
I've got lots of flowers.
Yeah, but all over the place.
Well, on those 7 properties.
Oh, yeah. But like where the Balar is down in Mythcott.
Yeah, we're not looking at Balar.
I'll take it on board. We'll bring it up. We certainly have, we have a list like this long of research questions within the Conservancy. We keep farming them out and trying to get students to work on them, but glossies can be a bit tricky because they're hard to find, particularly if it's research on nesting. You can't guarantee.
I was meant to do my PhD in Queensland, and after 1 year, I was like, I haven't found any nests. I have to go to KI.
The subject's missing in action. There's certainly something on the feed trees.
Yeah, and that's mostly what we think is limiting their conservation. So that's really where the research needs to happen. No, on the feeding habitat. Yeah, if people want to study trees, like there's so many questions, particularly with fire and drought and all of these different things.
Are they fussy eaters? Like, would they starve to death?
I don't think so. Only because we have had those records coming in recently that they are feeding on a few others. And you know that in captivity, they'll eat what other cockatoos eat. So they will eat.
They're like a 2-year-old child, they'll just...
It's just possible. If you're starving, they have to eat.
When you get really hungry, you will eat. But the amount of energy that they would be using to say, for example, if they shifted to river sheoaks, with the tiny seeds that
It's not, there's no,
they're really going to
Yeah.
have to work hard. So they might,
yeah.
you know, they already spend, 80% of their day
But when you've
feeding.
got the same stand of a she oak, you've got a dozen trees all next to it and they're only choosing one.
But that's a profitability thing as well. So most of the research shows that that tree is different to the other trees around it. It's not just them being picky, it's picky for a reason, and it's to maximise the bang for the buck. It's the soil, the minerals, the number of seeds that tree produces. Could be its genetic makeup is slightly better. Like there's always
Nobody's
something.
really done any propagating from those trees.
Janet Carew is
There's a few people propagating from
feed trees.
seed from
Yeah.
non-feed
It would make
trees to
sense.
see if
That's what we do on
that's-
Kangaroo Island as well.
And
Yeah.
it might be like the koala stuff, where all that enormous amount of scats are under regrowth in those little drainage lines and creeks. So they're leaving all these fantastic big trees and devouring these fellas because they're obviously more tastier.
Yeah.
So it could be that tree's also, like you say,
Yeah.
minerals and
There have,
moisture.
Yeah.
as far as I understand, correct me if I've got this wrong, Danny, but I think people have tried to find out what the difference is between this tree and that tree, and we can't work it out. But the glossies,
Yeah.
they know that's different. They know that tree's much better than that tree, and they're going to go there. But we can't work out
No.
why.
Can't see
And there's
why.
all sorts of hypotheses about maybe they have a visual ability to, ultraviolet or something to see that this seed is different to that seed. And then Don Sands hypothesised that there was a particular little bug that would be.
I don't know about that.
Ones they
Yeah.
like. I've seen a paper that didn't support that.
We've
Tiny bugs.
we
You
have
see them. You see, sorry, Dan, you do see them trying. They test them to see if they're
Yeah.
ripe. You'll find trees with.
Yeah.
They checked, oh, it's not quite ripe enough yet. So there's something to do with the ripeness of the seed before they'll feed on it.
because they're not just feeding on the seed, they're feeding on the kernel, right? So you can have a lot of the studies you'll look at Clout's index, which is something that they reference in a lot of the papers, which is just basically your seed fill essentially, but not every seed has a kernel. So in many ways, I think we've been looking at the wrong thing. So we're like, oh, there's no difference between the trees. But we've had a student who's actually cracked open all the seeds and gone, well, that tree actually had way more kernels, even though it had the same number of seeds. And the kernel is what they're eating. So there's, so we might have been looking at the wrong thing the whole time.
I was surprised to see Lemonii. Was it on your list or Daniella's list?
Yeah, I've never seen any ords.
Lemonii, flat little tiny
Mm.
little cones.
Red-tailed black cockatoos eat them too.
Sorry?
The red-tailed black cockatoos eat Lemonii as well. Yeah, it's like preferred food source for them. So I know they're tiny. Yeah.
There's a land for wildlife property I used to look after on the main range, and the fellow there was from Durham, the department, back in the day.
Yeah.
And they did, I think, 80 trees that had orts underneath them, and over the 15 years they owned it, it all started to change.
Yeah.
Like, it was like, oh, they're not eating that one anymore, what's going on?
I
Yeah, them all.
Yeah, I think part of that is because they're such relatively short-lived trees. Like I think that's also part of it. So definitely on KI, again, we can't generalise, but on KI, after about 25 years, the birds will pretty much stop feeding on them. So they're going for the younger trees
They're not producing.
because they're not producing as much. Yeah, which is really concerning when you have trees that are all the same age, because then they all die at the same time. And that's the problem that we're facing on Kangaroo Island now, is that we've lost 70% of the feeding habitat. Everything's going to regenerate and it's going to be great for the next 25 years, and then they're all going to die at the same time. And yeah, exactly. So we need to start managing that.
They seem to come together in the same. You look around and it's not little ones and big fellas. There's a big group
Exactly.
of fellas around, so
Yeah, yeah,
Mass germination.
yeah,
So some of our species in southeast Queensland are fire dependent.
yeah.
So they'll only germinate after a fire. So the fire will go through, and then that infants
Fire
is
dependent?
Yeah.
It is. They germinate only after fire. The challenge with some of those ones is if you have a fire and they germinate, and then you have another fire, you wipe them out.
Exactly. Yeah.
You've destroyed your seed bank. So
didn't know they
fire
were
is.
fire dependent.
Mm.
Fire, is it
They're serotinous is the term. Littoralis.
It's littoralis.
Yeah.
Fire.
Yeah, littoralis.
But we find that the recruitment happens irrespective of fire. They're not dependent on it.
They prefer it. Yeah.
You do get mass
Germinate,
germination.
yeah,
after fire
certainly.
of littoralis.
Because most of our properties haven't had fire through them for about 30 years minimum, and we've still got recruitment.
They just like disturbance, it seems, as well.
Could be a smoke thing as well. You might have smoke.
That's
Well,
right.
that works for a lot of our
We have a lot of
species.
smoke.
You don't actually have to have the heat, you can have the smoke. That could be triggering the germination.
I was up at Crow's Nest the other day, and they had them like this, the toy laser. I couldn't believe the amount of them.
Wow.
This fellow wanted to knock all that rubbish down. The under-scrubbing, and they're like the first thing that go.
I know.
And
It's
then
so
the father
bad,
lived
isn't
next
it?
door in a shed and took us to a tree which they visited every morning and afternoon. This tree was just absolutely splattered with them.
Yeah.
But he's talked his son out of clearing them.
Good.
Thank God.
Yeah.
How hard would it be for an enthusiastic amateur to buy one of these audio moths, acoustic,
Not hard at all.
and then get on?
Ben's got some here.
I might interrupt.
Yeah, go Courtney.
Thank you. What we have actually done, because we're really interested in contributing to filling in some of these information gaps that the Conservancy has, and I know Lucy is working on addressing the same goal and really trying to inform these recovery strategies. So we have, Ben and Little Liverpool have gone out and purchased some audio moths that we have available to loan out to interested landholders. So they come in these neat little waterproof boxes that I'm struggling to open. There we go. And they're just very sweet, tiny little battery-powered devices that we think we'll be able to get about 6 weeks worth of calls from, depending on frequency and a few tweaks that I'm going to have to do to look at, or we're going to have to do looking at noise and interference from wind and things like that. But yes, these are, we'll just do a little bit of a trial run for them, and then hopefully they'll be available to anyone who wants to trial them on their property in the next few weeks, hopefully.
Is that double A's or?
They are double A, yes, and I've got all the batteries for them. So the initiative will loan out the batteries for you and the SIM cards, and if you're really keen on doing the data analysis and looking at the spectrograms, you are more than welcome to give it a shot, or otherwise that can be a future me problem. And I can try and do that troubleshooting and data management and analysis for you guys as well. So I guess our key interests as well is looking at where the feed trees are here across the range, and also trying to identify any nesting hollows as well. So you can monitor by using these devices if you like, or otherwise we've developed an iNaturalist citizen science platform, which I can share the invite to, so if you guys do see the birds or are able to take photos of them, you can upload them into our project page, the Little Liverpool iNaturalist page, and we'll collect the data, share it with the Conservancy and of course all the local councils that we work with, so that we can have a better habitat map for the species here. Okay. But yeah, so up here, if you wanted to have a little squiz at them, they're quite impressive. And we'll just cable tie them to trees, so very easy to install.
Just out of interest, our records all go on Wildnet. Does the Conservancy actually access that?
We do.
I do, yeah.
Yeah. So when we do,
Good at sharing data.
yeah, we've got a
between
data
all
share agreement with Wildnet.
Yeah.
So the Conservancy's data does feed into Wildnet, and we also extract data from Wildnet for doing, when we've got particular projects we want to do analysis on, we'll get an extract and make that kind of thing happen.
Yeah.
So
as long as it goes somewhere.
yeah,
we'll find it.
yeah, that's right. I guess the thing with Wildnet is that because they're getting data from the Conservancy, they do put some restrictions on where that data goes, so you can't, it's considered a third source because we agree to provide that information. So it just means you can't, not everybody can get everything out of Wildnet, but the Conservancy is accessing the Wildnet's data as well as collecting our own. So all of that information was used to develop the habitat mapping, which is now under legislation in Queensland to help protect the known habitat for glossies, and also put some caveats on areas flagged as potential habitat where we don't have records of the birds, but the ecosystem and the other characteristics seem to be the same. So that actually is helping to, for local government planning, for people doing lots of research, it actually helps guide that.
There's a lot of legislation. I call it legislation of exemptions. Honestly, because you talk about that, and I just think of that a particular person who underscrubbed everything,
Yeah.
and also some habitat trees which were hollows, and got away with it because he was clearing weeds under the NRM, which is run by Dracula, in charge of the blood bank. And it is. And then the other thing that they're exempt from is forestry practice. You can do almost anything you like, even though they've got guidelines that you can't clear 20 metres from a creek. They still do it because no one polices it. It's been going on forever.
Absolutely.
I don't
Totally agree.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, and I guess the concern we have, you know, particularly in this part of the world, is we have a rapidly growing population, and the infrastructure that is needed to support that population, you know, it just means that there are more and more threats. There's more and more cumulative impact. There's more and more, you know, development occurring in areas adjoining bushland, and then the bushland is then modified to reduce the fire threat to the housing that's now established next to it. So, which is why, again, glossies are fortunate. They do occur in urban landscapes. We may be able to put up hollows to support them. We can plant their food tree species. It's not like, you know, some of the species that are out here at Hidden Vale in those enclosures down there. Those things really need special attention and aren't ever going to live in somebody's backyard. So we're fortunate with glossies, but we do have to put in coordinated strategies, and it does take large landscapes of active people scattered through those landscapes to make a difference for that species. And it's a long-term plan. We're not going to see recovery happen within, you know, we've got some bushfire funding. Yay, let's get that done by June next year because we're going to recover the species. Well, no, we're not.
but you have to start now.
Well, that's, you know, so we know that the recovery is 50, 100 years, you know, particularly for these long-lived, slow reproducing species. But if we engage the community and the community understands that, then that can actually drive some of this conservation. You can drive it at a policy level, and it can drive it in terms of the on-ground action. And in the case with Lucy and some of the other, it's informing the research to guide the actions as well. So there's many, many ways. Individually you can contribute, and collectively we can contribute.
What is the bird's purpose in the ecology?
What is their purpose?
Yeah, you know, in the ecology, what are they?
They
do.
They stop the
They're just
infiltration of she oaks everywhere by eating their seeds.
They do move seeds around the landscape.
Do they?
Yeah, make sure they plant.
Yeah, no, we were asked that. Somebody emailed the Conservancy, and Ian replied and said something like,
Some of the seeds make it through?
No, he was like, oh no, we don't, you know, nothing obvious. And then I was like, wait, I have photos, and I've got really cool photos of them carrying the sheo cones to other places. So they definitely help moving the plants around, moving seed around. So we can kind of think of them in that sense.
That's probably an ideal one.
Everything in ecology is made for a reason, isn't it? There's a pecking order really for everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
They're so closely tied to she oaks. They're so specialised that it makes sense. They're found only in this habitat, and they help, like, you know, keep that habitat going, essentially. Like, no other bird is so specialised in Australia or cockatoo.
Does anybody breeding the trees that they feed on?
Yes.
Nurseries and that?
Yeah. They're common.
You can buy it pretty easily, can you?
You can buy the species you can buy really easily.
Yeah.
There are some nurseries who are growing trees from seed from known feed trees to see if that makes a difference.
Yeah.
But you could go to, I think you could even go to Bunnings and buy Casuarina littoralis in tube stock and plant it. Generally really commonly available. The food trees are everywhere in the landscape.
But it's best if you've grown what's locally sourced because it suits that soil condition topography.
It needs to suit our soil, I tell you.
And in October, I think
They
the
say you
rose
can't, any
plant sales still going ahead.
You can't kill
Just
it. We'll fix that. But we've got some down here, but I think they've only got the small seed.
Okay.
Are they on a creek?
No, dry land just down the road.
Creek, what's a creek?
Yeah.
There you go. So
It's a paved dry
they have to
gully.
be the same. have to be.
There's a lot of littoralis around here.
There's only one patch of them on the place in Hard, bit of a country there.
So Hidden Vale's got Hidden Vale's got Cunninghamiana, the river sheo.
Yeah.
It's also got littoralis and it's got torullosa. There's extensive stands of it through Hidden Vale property. So they'd be all throughout the Liverpool range. You'd have those 3 species. They wouldn't be on the river sheo, but they will be feeding on the other 2. So just if you've got them and it's not a river sheo, just check out your trees every now and then and see if you've got any orts happening underneath them.
Gosh, I look at my Valar all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're probably 25 feet tall.
Yeah.
And my daughter came back and said, I see these black cockatoos feeding on these shaggy trees down the road. And I went, what? So when they stand there, they've been there 30 years, somebody planted them.
Cool.
And there's there's 3 of them in there chomping away. Yeah. Orts everywhere.
There's a site I've been out at...
Valar,
And they lead on them.
Oh,
they're
big
like
fruits.
There's a site out at Spillway Common at Wivenhoe Dam that I've been to where there's some big trees with orts underneath them, but then you've got the road and they've created like this mound of dirt along the roadside, some kind of, that Seckwater did at some point. And there's these spindly sheoaks that have probably been about this high, single trunk, hard any leaf, with like 3 cones on them, and there's a couple of, 1 or 2 orts underneath it. So they've come by, they've fed, and they're, that one's tasty, and they've got, the tree would have bent over to the ground with a bird on it, but,
Was that littoralis?
I think so, yeah. Really spindly.
Because Grantchester's full of those little fellas.
Yeah, really spindly, but so, once the tree grows and provides fruit, if the glossies like it, they'll come and feed on it. Don't know how
I've
they...
seen them flying over here, but I haven't actually seen them. I'll have to have a look under the tree.
Under the tree.
The other day there were 7. Normally they fly north-south, but the other day there were 7 going west-east, so they might have been moving out of the fire zone up where the man was saying there.
They're doing lots of strange movements at the moment.
It's unusual for them to go.
And they do respond to...
They're in Melbourne. 500 kilometres outside of their range. Like I had them where I live on the Gold Coast of Burleyheads. Like they haven't been seen in Burleyheads for 50 years. Like they're just turning up in very strange places. So I think it's drought mixed with fire. It's just
and they're so mobile. Like I mentioned that we came out here and got the 9 glossies down at dinner camp watering. The next year we came out, there'd been rain. They didn't go to that water hole, but 3 birds went 200 metres down the creek from me. By the time I realised they'd gone, they'd snuck in, had their drink, and I just went, oh no, they're down there. But the availability of water meant that it was just that local pair with their young that came to the water hole that time, whereas the previous year, 9 birds came to feed in this, in this, as I said, it was really skanky, slimy, muddy puddle. Because that's the only water that they could find in the landscape. So they are really mobile, they will move around.
Do you reckon they're breeding up along here?
Oh, there's got to be birds breeding somewhere in these hills. We've just got to find them.
Yeah, definitely. I can't...
These were ones had a young bird. So I guess they got my attention when we were out there because we were just walking. We could hear the young bird just begging all the time. This is constant, persistent... just kept going, okay, and there was mum, dad and a bub, sitting there. And so they are definitely breeding in this area. We've just got to find that nest tree and put an acoustic monitor on it.
That's something we want to do, find the nest site.
Oh, I have tried. I've found like 5, but that's taken me 4 years.
That's a record.
And it's
Sorry to interrupt, guys. Just in the interest of time, I just noticed a few people leaving. I might take the opportunity again to thank you all for coming out today and also extend a very big thank you to Danny and Liz for this lovely presentation. Please stick around, we can continue discussing and answering questions. There are biscuits and tea and coffee outside if you like, and also lots of resources here. So Glossy Black does